In other news today, one of the parties contesting the national and provincial elections next month is called Women Forward. It's a party that says it's focusing on the needs of women and will govern with love and care. It also says it's aimed at removing the patriarchal walls of our society. To discuss this further, I'm joined by the Gauteng Provincial Co-ordinator at the Women Forward Party, Thando Gumede. Ms. Gumede, good evening. Thank you so much for coming in.
Good evening, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me.
So what's the difference between your organisation and other political parties? What are you offering that other political parties are not offering?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, Stephen, let me mention that Women Forward is the only fully woman-led political party that's going to be contesting the elections. And what's special about us is that we will be representing women in all contexts of society, children, youth, LGBTQIA+, pensioners, refugees and stateless persons, etc., etc. And these are people of our community who have been silenced, who have been abused, who've been oppressed and even been killed. We actually represent the vast majority of our nation, and so we're ready to step up, step forward and go to Parliament.
Okay, so are you just appealing to women's votes? I mean, women are 55% of the electorate of registered voters. Is that who you're appealing to? Well,
we're appealing to all the people I've just mentioned, but we're also appealing to the allies of all the people that I've mentioned. So the organization is not excluding men at all. As I mentioned, the LGBTQIA+ community. So anyone who is an ally, who is in support of an equitable society should vote for Women Forward.
Okay, I mean, one of the issues you're obviously focusing on must be gender violence. And we use the phrase gender violence. We're talking about men attacking women. Yeah. If you were elected, if you become the government on May the 9th, what would you do to stop that?
Gender-based violence, first of all, is a national crisis. And I'm not sure why the country hasn't called a state of emergency. And from an economic perspective, the country hemorrhages about 100 billion rand just on gender-based violence alone. So as a political party that's contesting elections, we are proposing to put in place a national rollout of studies in the classroom that aim to dismantle patriarchy and gender norms within the classroom.
So some of the things you're talking about the eradication of gender-based violence, as you say, the eradication of extreme poverty and high unemployment. A lot of it, of course, as well, is about combating teen pregnancy, which has a huge impact on women, far more than it does on men.
HIV, TB as well.
You also want to, I mean, let's talk about the extreme poverty and high unemployment issue. What would you implement there to make a change? I mean, everybody has a policy to create new jobs. What would you do?
I'm glad that we're having the GBV discussion and then discussing jobs. So we don't only believe in job creation, but sustainable jobs for the future and jobs that are going to aim to dismantle gender norms and patriarchy. And so we are going to legislate for something called the Sex Act. The Sex Act is specifically aimed at sex workers in South Africa and decriminalizing sex work in South Africa, as well as creating a protective system around sex workers by criminalizing any kind of discriminatory behavior or conduct levied against sex workers, as well as creating a delictual claim in relation to sex workers, so that if they incur any kind of personal injury whilst they're at the workplace, they can be able to go and make a claim in court, as well as making sure that courts and Tutuzela centers, for example, are well-resourced and that there aren't any backlogs or lack of sexual reproductive health products made available to them.
I mean, all of that is very important and perhaps key, in fact, to our society. But I suppose the real issue is also creating jobs. I mean, what economic policies would you follow then?
Well, let's go up to the Paid Care Act. So we want to legislate that unpaid care in South Africa be completely abolished. For those who don't know what unpaid care is in South Africa, it's basically something that was created under the guise that women and girl children are mandated by gender norms to take care of the sick and the elderly without being paid to do that. They drop out of school, they have to stop whatever work they're doing, and essentially there's a regression or some kind of blockade in them moving forward and progressing in their lives.
You're talking about teenage boys are often allowed to spend time studying. Teenage girls are supposed to look after the younger siblings.
Precisely. So with the Paid Care Act, what we'll be doing is abolishing unpaid care work in South Africa and establishing a national scheme where they can be remunerated for the care work that they do in the home or in the community.
I don't think any country around the world has managed to do that. Sweden, Finland, they've tried certain things to try and make childcare more equal. They're very rich societies. They're very high tax rates. You get a lot of services back for your tax as well. I mean, do you think it's actually economically possible? The money has to come from somewhere.
It has to come from somewhere. And if we stop the corruption in our governance, then it can come from, the state pockets and the taxpayers' money. We do have the money to execute that. It's just that we are misusing funds. Money is being misappropriated. And if you have the right people in government, then funds can be adequately distributed where they need to be distributed. And I'm not sort of convinced that just because a European country didn't manage to do it, that then we are going to definitely fail to do it. Let's pioneer something. We've got a number of problems in this country, and so we are well primed and positioned to be the ones to solve those problems, not only for ourselves, but for the world at large.
Tied to that would be the issue of social grants. Now, women get more social grants than men because generally it's women who receive the childcare grant, for example. Would you like to see social grants increase, particularly for, say, childcare, which affects women far more than it does men?
Definitely. I mean, look at the cost of sanitary pads in our society and panties. No one has ever spoken about the fact that girls need panties so that they can be able to use the sanitary towel. So if we increase in favor of the girl child, we're increasing so that they can be able to buy sanitary pads and tampons as well as panties.
Okay. The various other issues you're talking about, I mean, you talk about sort of issues around making sure that women, for example, participate in decisions made around water and sanitation. I mean, the previous Water Affairs Minister was a woman. Are you saying that women aren't involved in those decisions at the moment?
Okay, I want to bring you back to our main key points. So can we please discuss the land issue in South Africa and land redistribution?
I'm very happy to get to that, but I mean, it is one of your points, right? That you want women.
Yes.
So why is it one of your points?
Well, it's one of our points because women are not part of any kind of land discourse, anything to do with land in South Africa. Women are sort of put aside and totally disregarded. So we want to make sure that, number one, there's an equitable distribution of land and that women have a voice in anything that has to do with land, sanitation and the environment.
Okay. At the moment, I'm informed that 3 of your candidates are men. Is that right?
Of our candidates going to parliament? Well, yes, but the party's leadership, the leadership of the party, is woman-led. It's fully woman-led.
Are those men allies of your movement? You said at the beginning
they're allies.
They're allies.
They're allies of our movement, yes.
Okay, so you're not exclusively female, if I can put it like that. No,
the leadership of our organization is female leadership, but our membership can be male membership.
Okay, and they would represent the party.
Remember that we also have human beings called trans women and trans men. So it would be counterintuitive to our beliefs for us to exclude those human beings as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. People have different political identities and the various elements that make up a political identity. Okay, so for example, let's use an American example. Someone's political identity, someone who votes for Donald Trump might be white, over the age of 50, male, feels poorer than their parents. That kind of person is more likely to vote for Donald Trump, but not necessarily. How much of an element, how big an element of South Africans' political identity do you think gender is? And what I'm trying to get to is, do you think that men and women vote differently?
You know, the thing about South Africa is that black women in particular have a tendency of making sacrifices to please everyone around them. And it's unfortunate because we've never had a party like Women Forward. So it's very difficult to answer that question. But I think us being able to step forward and give an alternative to what has already been there would be able to adequately answer your question after the elections. Women have their own crises, women have their own issues, and it's very explicit and it's well known. But we have taken the back burner, we've taken the back seat to say that we voted for our communities rather than voting for ourselves. And in this instance, we're asking for women to vote for themselves, to include their problems when they make their X on the ballot.
Okay, I mean, both the two major parties, I can't off the top of my head remember if the EFF has a women's movement, but certainly the Democratic Alliance and the ANC do.
Yeah.
Would you say those two bodies don't represent women? Have they, I think there's a union phrase for this, have they been corporatized?
You know what, Stephen, I'm really not interested in what the intellectual documentation or manifestos of these organizations say. I'm an academic and I know very much about copy and paste politics. What I care about is what leaders say, because it is when you look someone in the eye and have a conversation with them and discuss what they had put down on paper that you realize what kind of an organization they are. For example, Naledi Chirwa, who is one of the feminist youth leaders in the EFF, declared publicly that EFF is a patriarchal, misogynistic organization. She belongs to that organization and she's a leader in that organization. That goes against what they've written on their documentation and their manifesto about land redistribution being gender sensitive. So it doesn't matter what they write down, because most people don't even read those documents. They're massive documents. A huge population of South Africans are illiterate and unemployed and wouldn't even be able to access that kind of documentation. So how we know whether the politics of an organization is sincere is through what they say when you look at them in the eye, as well as what their billboards and advertisements say on the street. And as far as I'm concerned, they are patriarchal, and they have no interest in gender equity or any kind of equity in our society, especially for the individuals that we've mentioned or that I've mentioned earlier on in the segment.
Okay. There are other parties and other people, I think, around the world have tried to create women's parties. They haven't perhaps been as broad as yours, and they don't necessarily include allies, so men who think differently. Are you prepared to give us any prediction of how you'll do?
You know, it would be very arrogant for me to do that. You know, I just heard EFF saying that they're going to get a majority. So I don't want to say anything like that. I think we'd be happy to get several seats in Parliament and to make sure that our voices are heard in Parliament. South Africa is deeply embedded with patriarchy. It's deeply homophobic. And whilst we do represent the majority, it's very difficult to change the ideologies of people when, especially, we come from such a traumatic history. But I'm pleading with people out there to trust in us, to believe in us, to believe in our ethical leadership, to believe that we will represent them very well, to believe that we do have a plan of action as we head into Parliament, and that we're not just freestyling this as we go along.
Thando Gumede, thank you very much indeed for coming in. The Gauteng Provincial Co-ordinator at the party Women Forward. Thando Gumede talking to you tonight. Stay with us, plenty more to come here on SABC News.